Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to make a wrap dress from a base dress that usually comes with a zipper in the back. I already made this pattern multiple times. I used the skirt part for an actual skirt because it's nice and flowy, and I also made this in with more elastic fabric, so I didn't have to add a zipper. But in this case I want to use summery fabrics. So I picked out a cotton voile that I'm gonna put underneath just a normal evening dress gown chiffon fabric. And for this, both of them aren't elastic at all, fabric wise, so I wanted to make it a wrap dress and not a zipper dress, because zippers are always a little bit annoying, especially with more flowy fabrics. So I just want to make sure I can have a dress that is easy to put on by myself and looks nice, and considering that the parts in front already overlap, this should hopefully work out really nicely. So I started off with a mock-up, and I'm not changing too much in the background on the sides. Again, I've sewn this before so I know it fits. But the one thing I do need to change are the front panels where it's overlapping. So we have the back, and then we have, this is just the side underneath the armpits, so it gets the rounding of the breast nicely. And then you add a triangular panel in front that gets overlapped. So I'm just using an old bed sheet, tracing these things out, adding some seam allowance with my ruler, and just trying to make the pattern work. And this is the part I'm elongating. I measured out roughly how much I need for this to wrap to the side seam, because that is where I want the tying to be. For a wrap dress, I'm going to use just some string to tie it on the side, and the seam where it should meet up and tie up is the one underneath the armpit. So I made sure to have it long enough, and then I just sew everything together just with a simple running stitch, just so I don't have to worry about it falling apart, and I can just make any changes that I want. And putting it on my mannequin, this one is a sizable one, so it has my size. You can see the seam allowance overlaps on the arms a bit, but the side sits pretty much perfectly. And the only thing I really need to do is to trim up the length of the panel a little bit that I free-handed, because that can be a bit shorter. But with that done, it's time to actually make the pattern piece on paper, and I'm just using some old wallpaper for this. This is leftover wallpaper from years and years ago when we built our house, and it has these wood chips inside of it, but it works pretty well since it's pretty large for patterns. I've used so many different things over the years, from tapers leftover to leftover cardboard, but this stuff worked really nicely in this case. And then it was time to cut and mark my pieces out. So this is the base fabric, and this is a cotton voile, so it's a very fine woven cotton that should breathe nicely in summer, because my plan in the end after this project is I wanted a dress that I can wear in summer, but also a dress that I can style differently for Ren fairs and things like that. Just so, I have a flowy, breathable thing that also covers me from the sun. And this is the dreaded evening gown fabric. The other fabric is so slippery. I just really hope that I can work with it easily, but I also need to layer them a bit, because you can kind of see that how see-through this fabric is. It's very thin, so having this as a lining and then the other fabric on top should work out nicely. And all I'm doing here is using pins. Usually for my projects I also like to use these flat clamps. These almost crocodile clamps, these really flat plastic ones. But in this case, since I'm sewing curves, and since I also work with very slippery fabric that I need to put as lining, I decided to work with pins just to make sure that everything holds well. To finish the inside edges of this, for these seams I decided to just fold over the edge on one side and then zigzag stitch. But like for the arms and stuff, for the armholes and neck holes, I'm later going to hand sew them and add like another extra little bit of fabric so I can just neatly tuck in the edges. But for the inside seams, since they're covered up, you know, it was easier to sew them by machine. As for the lining process, I actually found after some trial and error that putting the slick fabric on the bottom to where the moving foot can like carry it is the best option for it not to slip much. It still slipped and deformed slightly, but you know, not too bad. I did have one instance where the bottom thread got caught. There was like one thread of the evening gown fabric like being pushed in, and that got entangled on the spool, but it was an easy fix, and I didn't really have any other issues with my sewing machine at all for the entire rest of the project. I guess I was just one unlucky hit with the needle. But yeah, after the lining part was done, it turned out actually pretty flat. I just trimmed all of the excess off, and I'm going to sew on like little leftover strips of the like dark green cotton wool fabric so that I can pretty up the edges later. But for now it's time for the front pieces, and these are a bit special because the underlying piece that sits on the skin is the piece where we have the little like patch on the side so that it forms nicely to the body, but the upper fabric, the overlaying fabric, should be like very flowy and creasy on purpose and gathered, so the piece is just one piece basically. I like pretty much guesstimated how much more fabric I need to add based on the pattern I drew per hand for the underlying fabric, and I think it worked out pretty well. I think if I had added any more fabric on top to get like the ruffling or creasing, then I think it would have been too much and it wouldn't have looked that nice. And this is already really hard to manage that the folds stay right. But yeah, all I did was I just used the straight stitch for the other fabric, and I put like both ends of the thread to like gather it, and then I pinned it down. And I sewed basically like the entire side that will be the neck hole later, and then the arm and the shoulder. But for the underside, so where it sits underneath the bust and like is connected to the belt section, I needed to gather it per hand because this is a very long piece. So I made sure to gather that, and then I tried to like place the folds nicely before sewing it on. So yeah, the pattern piece I drew per hand wasn't quite fitting, but after sewing, you know, I just cut off the excess. And then it was time, as you can see, to like slowly over the course of the next few days hand sew. So I just basically added these like strips of green fabric of the inner fabric that I can fold over. And this is where my first mistake happened. I sewed one panel on the wrong side, so yay, I needed to seam rip that. This took like over an hour to seam rip. I didn't fully sew it luckily, so it wasn't too bad, like I noticed like halfway through, but this was still one of the longer pieces. But in the end, as you can see, I managed to fix it, and then I just went into trimming off the excess, and the rest is gonna be like hand sewn. And the hand sewing was tricky in and of itself because I needed to make sure to like not hit the outer fabric and just sew like tiny bits of the inner fabric. So kind of like a hidden seam, but yeah, I managed in the end. It was just a bit more finger cramping than normal. And while I was doing that, like on the side, whenever I had like appointments and things like that and had to wait, I also worked on the skirt and the belt. So I started off with the skirt panels of the base, And then I made the belt. You can see I had to piece it a little bit in one spot because I didn't have the length of fabric anymore, but that was totally fine since the upper fabric doesn't have any seam, so you cannot see. So the belt section is basically like one strip of fabric that is like the width that the belt should have, and then the upper fabric is like being just ruffled a little bit, and that is just being gathered by hand in this case before I sew it on. I'm purposefully using some bright red thread here to help me being able to remove it later. Like in other instances, I'm going to use thread that you will not be able to see, like a different shade of green or black. Which, by the way, I chose black for this because I couldn't find my darker green. I only found my lighter green, and the problem with that is like all of the seams are in like folds. That's usually where there's shadows. If you use a lighter thread than what your fabric is, you will 100% see it, like it will stick out way more. If you use a darker thread, like in this case I use black, it will look like there's, you know, shadows in this seams, and it will like basically vanish. But here you can see I basically like just pull the edges together, and after sewing it I also sewed on another strip to hand sew over. I needed to make the belt strip a bit longer also, again so that it can overlap, because the belt strip is basically what I'm going to attach all the closures to, so it needed to be like so long that it can again like wrap around entirely a bit more than once, from the front panel to it overlapping again on the side underneath the arm. And then again, that was all just hand sewing, and yeah, I needed to kind of hold the fabrics very awkwardly so I wouldn't like catch the other fabric. And this was actually the first piece I hand sewn, and you could see I struggled a bit in the beginning, but then I found like a way to like crease it and fold it over to where like I could grab just the inner fabric and then sew it. And that's basically the exact same thing I did for like all the armholes and the neckline and all that, just a ton of hand sewing. And then it was time to join pieces. So starting off with the belt and the shirt part, and then also adding the skirt. And this was actually the easiest part, but I also decided to use a French seam, so you can see me sew it together like outside in, so, or inside out, you know, like the outside fabric like being outside, or top and bottom first, and like the lining fabric on the inside basically. And then to make it a French seam, I'm just like clipping the excess and then I'm turning it around. And for this I decided to do this per hand and not use pins, because I needed to feel for every section, since the belt isn't fully like ruffled yet. I needed to see that I don't catch the upper fabric, so I just turned it over by hand, and with that I attached the two pieces. And then I tried it onto my doll, and that worked really well. Then it was time to trace out the skirt parts out of the slick fabric, and here you can see I'm actually like all the time actively using my sewing weights that I made. They work amazing. I'm so happy that I finally have some nice and cute custom sewing weights, and they're so easy to pick up. Now, sewing the skirt was a nightmare. I tried to like place the panel so that the like direction of the fibers would match up, so that the stretch would be fairly even, because this fabric is very like flexible. I mean, it's not that flexible, but it is fairly movable, like in between the fibers, like on the bias. So I just sewed it without pins, because with pins it would crease so much. And then I tried to do a rolling hem on the edges, but I'm gonna pick that up later and sew that per hand again, because I really hated it. And it was time to attach the skirt. Both of the skirts have like a little gap on the sides. On the last panel I didn't fully sew the panel, and that is just so that I can't get it over my hip, because you know that's the whole point of a wrap dress. So I sewed on this like very thin piece of fabric that is just the outer layer fabric, and this is just so it covers up the edges a little bit, and it kind of, you know, looks like there's no opening there. So I sewed that in on both sides of the gap, and then I trimmed off the excess carefully per hand. I left a little bit of extra fabric that I sewed a bit longer so I can hand sew it. And then it's basically like a triangular piece that is left that I then can tuck in to like hide it. It's really hard to show on camera here. I have only very limited desk space. But yeah, it's basically just a little piece that covers all of the seams and like a bit of the inside. Plus, if I like don't fully pull string, like if I change my size or something and I need to have it a bit looser, you will not see the opening as much then. But yeah, here you can see after like, I think that was like 5 or 6 hours of hand sewing, I finished all the edges. Once they're washed, they should like sit nice and flat. But for now, it was time to put on the finishing touches. So here you can see the panel again, and how this works is like it zips on the inside and then like the outside of the belt meets up. But I first need to work on the belt because the upper fabric doesn't sit nicely, like it needs to be gathered on multiple places. So what I did is I used some thread to gather it, and then I went in with some really tiny stitches into the creases, and I basically just stitched like the folds down, kind of a bit more invisibly, because the gathers were very in-your-face gathers, you know, they were very, obviously there was like a thread showing, so I tried to like catch all the low spots and then just like ruffle it, and while I was doing that, I had to fix a hole in the upper fabric. This is my camera arm, and it has a really sharp underside. You can see even the metal is really scratched up there, and it put a hole in my piece. Luckily it's on the side of the fabric that you will not see. But yeah, by the end, this is what I had. You can see the armholes fit really nicely. The folds on the lower panel don't sit that well, but I added like a little hook and loop metal thingy, so that like the breast part, like the neck part, wouldn't open. And then I added another hook. You cannot really see it, it was very dark in my room. I added that on the side where the tie is at well, just so it wouldn't open. And then it was time for washing. At this point I still hoped that I could fix the creasing of the rolled hem from the outer fabric, so I put it in like one of those laundry bags. I washed it, and then when I hung it up in the bathroom to dry, I put on some of these just you know, normal laundry clips. And I really hope that would pull it straight. It did help a little bit, but it didn't fix it, so in the end, again, I did some hand sewing. Now one thing you can see here in the reveal, this is not quite done, but this is the part where I ended at the video. When I wore it outside later, I made some changes. You can see the left-hand side, or my left-hand side, like it didn't crease that nicely, and it like slipped down a bit. I added like one of those little small snap buttons, like the ones you can hand sew on the inside, just so that the front fabric wouldn't slip down. This is just because the fabric is too slick, and that helped a great lot, and like it also prevented the skirt from sagging. But yeah, here you can see the final result. And I have to say, I really love it. I purposefully, I didn't have enough fabric to make the panels longer. Like, I ordered a decent bit of fabric, but the outer fabric is super expensive. So chiffon fabric, you know, is very expensive. So I like couldn't make as long of panels as I would have loved to. Like I would have loved to have them ankle length. But if I think about it, like as a summer dress, having it not as long may actually be better, especially if I'm going to events and stuff. So it's not being caught on anything. And especially if I wear like shoes with like buckles or something, it may get snatched in that, since it's a very like thin fabric and I wouldn't want that to happen. So I think this is actually way better. And also the unevenness on the underside of the skirt is of course like being fixed later by the buckle thing I added. I'm actually gonna put in a picture of how it looks like right now with like all the fixed fasteners. And yeah, here you got it. This is the final result. Now, the outer fabric was again a nightmare to work with, so it is slightly creasy, but when I'm wearing it and like it's all folded like it is, you cannot really notice it in the skirt panels. It still bothers me personally a slight bit, but knowing how much of a nightmare it was to work with, I am already really happy. I also really love how the gathering on the belt part looks, because I spent like hours trying to hand sew that so it wouldn't be as obvious as it was when I just put the like thread in and gathered it. So that worked out super nicely, and it's very comfortable and very easy to put on. Like also very comfortable in summer. It has been really hot in the last couple days, and I have actually been actively wearing it every single day, and it works super well with the breathable fabrics, because that is in the end, you know, why I chose cotton voile, because it's very nice and breathable and a nice summer fabric. Also apologies that I didn't like fully manage to show all of my process. I know it was really hard from some of the footage to see what I was doing, but I only have limited table space and floor space, and it was super hard to film this. So I kind of tried my best, but since like this is also my first time filming, making something like this, I struggle quite a lot. And like the amount of takes I did for certain parts, like showing things on the mannequin, it is very dark in the other room where I have it, and I struggled so much to film these parts so you guys can see anything. So yeah, I hope you still could gather like kind of my process. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this dress, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, I also hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye.